You're listening to 4CRB's interviews and talkback series.
Joining me on the microphone this morning is Supreme Court Judge. I still have to miss that retired and skip over that retired is gone. He's now a Supreme Court Judge once again. David Ashton-Lewis, good morning to you.
Well, Colin, you're always such a pleasure to be with because you always smile. I've never seen you frown. You always smile. And ladies and gentlemen out there in 4CRB land, he is as cheeky as anything. And I was just telling him how good I think he is in the afternoons. And he said to me, I'm not good, I just am a traveller, a journeyman, I just do it. I said to him, no, you're not. You're excellent. So, ladies and gentlemen, I say good morning to you, every one of you who are listening, and I have a good morning for my beautiful son, who is 32 years of age. He is a film animator, and he is in Cambridge, in England, and I was really disappointed when he made it clear to me. I speak to him every morning, and he said, Dad, you sound okay, but Colin makes you sound better.
Oh, dear.
And I said, what? And he said, I really like Colin, so I said, I'm going to twist his arm this morning to say good morning to my son Somerset in Cambridge.
And my commiserations to you, Somerset. I have no idea how you grew up with a father like that.
Yes, look, people do have to suffer me, and I'm so thankful that the listeners do, that you do, Colin, and my beautiful sons do, and I just thank you for suffering me.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to say hello to everyone else who's listening.
Yes.
We've got a great topic for you this morning, and it's topical. We've seen a fair bit in the news about it this week.
Well, can I just say before you get to if anyone would like me to thank them, like I've thanked my son, I would ask that you send in, give us your name, and I will be more than happy to thank you personally. I listen to Barry Coleman do it every morning, but he's on for a few hours.
All right, so that email address is mail@4crb.com, and we can forward it straight to David's inbox.
Yes, you can, and I promise I will recognise you and thank you for the courtesy of your kind invitation.
All right, let's move on to the topic of the day, the ICC, the International Cricket...
Oops.
No.
Well, it could be the International Cricket Council, but unfortunately where you're heading is not there.
No, the International Criminal Council.
No, court. It's the International Criminal Court. It's a division.
So
well,
I'm glad that you're
division.
here. You just correct all of these things, don't
Pardon?
you? I'm glad that you're here. I throw out all these lovely, purposeful mistakes.
No,
and you
he
correct
does
me.
it on. I want you to know, ladies and gentlemen, he knew it was the International Criminal Court. He does it on purpose, but that's why Colin and I are so good. One more quick thing. Would you like Colin and I
I'll stop it.
to do a music program? I don't mind being the judge and very serious, but Colin and I, as you've probably picked up from the short time this morning, we have tremendous banter and jocularity with each other. And Colin and I have been talking about doing a radio music show. And I've got to say, I listened to Colin in the afternoon on the Drive show, and I think he's fantastic. I think he is absolutely first class at what he does. Now, but I better get on because he's looking at me with daggers. Okay, the International Criminal Court.
All right, what is it?
The International Criminal Court it sprang out of the International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice sprang out by the United Nations in 1945, and the International Court of Justice's job is to deal with disputes between nations who adhere and sign themselves up to the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. Now, that usually involves trade disputes. It usually involves border disputes. And so there is currently hearings before the International Court of Justice, or the ICJ, between Vietnam, Malaysia, not so much Taiwan, and the People's Republic of China as to certain borders and boundaries in the South China Sea. And so that's what it did, basically civil dispute matters. Then in 2002, the Treaty of Rome was signed under the UN in 1998, and it established a forum known as the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court sat for the first time in 2002. Now, the International Criminal Court's functions are to deal with genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and aggression. And for those of you who will remember back to the terrible Balkans wars between 1991, 1998, there was this disgraceful Serbian general and, sadly, a disgraceful Serbian leader who, by the way, happened to be a psychiatrist, a man trained in medicine, well-spoken, called Radovan Karadzic. And the Serbian general was General Mladic. Now, in 1991, General Mladic and his forces captured and imprisoned about 2,000 Bosnian Muslims. And if any of you can remember the photographs of General Mladic looking at the prisoner of war camp, you could have been looking at 50 years before that of Heinrich Himmler walking along the outside fence looking at Russian prisoners of war in their prisoner of war camps. Now, the famed Auschwitz was not only an extermination camp of Jews, it was also a camp for 400,000 captured Russian soldiers. And they were looking like skeletons, exactly like the way Australians looked when they were released from Japanese prisoner of war camps, and particularly the camp at a place called Kanchanaburi on the Burma Railway. These men were just skeletons covered in one layer of flesh. But what this General Mladic and Mr. President or Premier Karadzic did was they instituted this all on the basis that Croatians, Bosnians were enemies of Serbia. And so we had to live through that again. So in 2002, the International Criminal Court, not the International Criminal, or the ICC as opposed to the International ICJ, the International Criminal Court came into being sat. General Mladic was one of the first peoples. They have the power to issue warrants of arrest. Now, the international courts have no power themselves. They have to rely on the nations that sign up. Now, Serbia had signed up to do it. So finally, Mladic was caught. He was put on trial. The International Criminal Court cannot sentence anyone to death, but they can sentence them to the term of their natural life in prison. Mladic was sentenced for war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity, because he commanded Serbian forces to shoot people point blank. He was put on trial, he was found guilty, and he was imprisoned. He argued, if you might have seen the films, where he was in the court sits in The Hague, and he said, "I don't recognise your sovereignty." But sadly for him, Serbia did.
Yes.
Anyway, he ended up dying in prison. Radovan Karadzic, as far as I've been able to find out, and I'm happy to be corrected, is still in prison. He was finally captured. He stood before the International Criminal Court, made up of 15 judges from all the nations of the world. I should add that we currently have an Australian judge on the International Court of Justice and the ICC, one Miss Judge Hilary Charlesworth. Very good judge. From memory, I think she comes from Western Australia, was a West Australian Supreme Court judge. I should add, I was asked when it was Fiji's term in 1995, would I be interested in sitting on the International Court of Justice? I said yes, and I would have gone there. Usually it's for a 3-year term, and then you get reappointed. But my son nearly died, and I wasn't able to go. So the International Criminal Court deals with these areas: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and aggression. They can issue warrants of arrest. They usually let those warrants of arrest go to the nation of that particular person. For instance, and I think Colin will get onto this today, there has been a request by the prosecutor, who is an English QC or KC, to issue warrants of arrest against Benjamin Netanyahu, the leader of Israel, and against three, I'm sorry, cannot remember their names, but three men who are the leaders of Hamas, and to issue warrants. Now, there's been a massive international kickback, and it's been, as you can guess, it's been from the liberal democratic Western governments that Netanyahu should not be in this, because he's not a terrorist. He's committed no crimes against humanity. And I was glad to see a commentator today, if we've got time I'll touch on that. They're sick to death of hearing how Julian Assange is a hero, and the attitude is he should be locked up and throw away the key. He's a treasonous traitor who put numerous lives in danger by releasing information that he had no authority to release. And I can only repeat again, if we don't like what our intelligence forces do, then change the government, change the law. But while it's the law, you stick by it. And we're caught in this terrible instance of, I'll obey the laws that I agree with, but I won't obey the ones I don't. Now, what has happened? There is a massive kickback against Benjamin Netanyahu being put into the same category as those three Hamas terrorist leaders. Now, I hear constantly, I speak a lot, around southern Queensland, Brisbane, etc., about the terrible war crimes being committed by Israel. I hear nothing about the war crimes committed by Hamas.
And I love the fact that you're hearing this, David, but again, these are all from reports that media outlets are distributing. They're not seeing them firsthand. They're not hearing them.
No, of course they're not.
So,
And I've used the term before. Anyone who is supporting Palestinians or supporting and not condemning what Hamas did are supporters of Nazism. They support what the Germans, the National Socialists did to Jews, Gypsies, and homosexual people between 1939 and 1945. Isn't it lovely? That Nazi state was claimed by others who visited it between 1933 and 1939. What a great state it was, because they noticed that they didn't have any mentally defective people. Now, they didn't have mentally defective people because they were gathered up by the Nazis and quietly euthanized.
Yes.
And after the war, there were many applications to the post-war democratic German government for answers. What happened to my brother, my mother, or whatever? What happened to them? And to the German government's credit, they still pay reparations to Israel.
Yes.
Well, they were up until about 5 years ago, and they still paid reparations to families who the Nazis had taken mentally sick and ill and defective people. So let's go back now to this Israel-Hamas thing. That what Israel has done is no different than what the RAF Bomber Command and the United States Air Force did between late 1943 up until about January, February 1945. Mosquito high-speed fighters would fly over Dresden, Bremerhaven, Munich, dropping leaflets telling the civilian population that in a week or a day or whatever, they wouldn't usually name the date, that there's going to be massive area bombing. Now, area bombing was developed by the Americans and the English first, and then the Americans came on board, that you just bomb everything. You don't need to look for military targets. You bomb everything. You bomb the suburbs. You bomb everything in Stuttgart, Bremerhaven.
I want to move back to the ICC for a moment, David, just for the issuing of these warrants, and again, it still comes down to the mechanism and how it works.
Yes.
Who is policing this up, and how many countries are subscribed to, or
124 are subscribed. Australia is one. And how this starts is the prosecutor is given investigative powers. Now, he is a man called Khan Karim, I think. He's an English King's Counsel, obviously eminent,
Yes.
and he's been carrying out investigations. And why I got onto that German area bombing, let's be clear, there is no doubt that Israeli forces and Israel, in fact, have killed innocent civilians. We've spoken in the past. That is the price of war. Area bombing was, well, we'll kill civilians because it'll bring peace. So innocent Palestinians have been killed. Something like the Hamas say about 14,000. Other numbers are much higher. And they've been killed by the Israeli Defense Force. But the distinguishing point is, when Hamas crossed the border on the 7th of October, they were targeting civilians, women, children, babies, old men and women. Now, they were no different to the area bombing of the Second World War, targeting old men, old women, innocent children, blah, blah, blah. Israel has gone in, and every bit of my intelligence, and I do have access to certain intelligence sources that even the modern press don't have access to, the Israelis, on the whole, not all the time, but on the whole, give warning. Like in Rafah, they warned people in the northern part of Rafah, within a few days we are going to attack. Please vacate. Now, it's all very well to say that, but there was nowhere for those people to go. There are now Palestinian people living in sand dunes on the beach. No water, no sanitary. So Israel is to be condemned for that. But it's not been a direct policy of Israel. It's been part of fighting a war against a disgraceful group of terrorists who most of the trendy elites in the West think are such glorious freedom fighters, and I will repeat again. These terrorists are knuckle-dragging, imbecilic, moronic, horrible, and they should be stopped. Now, you put pressure on the Israelis. Don't give them and the lightweight, uneducated imbeciles in the West, don't give them the opportunity to criticise you. I was very glad to see that Chalmers, our treasurer, and to a certain extent Albanese, said there is no equivalence when these warrants were going to be issued, and the investigator has the authority to do it on his own back in the ICC. And they at least came out and said, well, certainly Chalmers did, there's no equivalence between Hamas and between what the Israelis have done.
So, give us an example of where the ICC has publicly gone after someone, and you did that in Bosnia, but I note that the Russian president there's a warrant out for his arrest.
Russia, China, there's a couple of others. North Korea,
yes,
have not subscribed, so they are not members of the ICC. Now, yes, I know there's a warrant against Vladimir Putin, and there should be. He's committed genocide. He has committed crimes against humanity. He has committed all of those areas that the ICC has a mandate from the UN to go after. War crimes. Now, the thing is that the warrant, provided these people stay in their own country, can't be touched. But if Benjamin Netanyahu or
Vladimir
Putin, if they travelled to, say, France, they wouldn't, because they could be arrested and brought before the International Criminal Court like General Mladic was, and like Radovan Karadzic was. I've forgotten where Karadzic was found. He wasn't in Serbia. And so if the risk for these people is if they travel outside, Israel has not subscribed to the International Criminal Court. And so if, as I said, Benjamin Netanyahu travelled to Spain or to the United Kingdom, they run the risk of being arrested.
Wow. So then obviously a trial is set. Yep. They're assessed.
Yes.
And if they're found guilty, what happens?
They're then sentenced.
Now, and who carries out the sentence? The country of origin?
Usually it is either the country of origin. Now, if you take Mladic and Karadzic, well, Serbia signed up to it. naturally. So they were found guilty and sentenced to lengthy terms of imprisonment in Belgrade.
Gotcha.
And it's monitored, so he's not given a quiet release. And as I said, General Mladic died in prison. I think I could be wrong, others will know, I think he committed suicide.
I see.
But Karadzic, as far as I know, is still alive and in prison in Serbia. But you never can know, depending on what government gets into power. I sentenced a 22-year-old man for the most brutal murder I have ever seen to a term of imprisonment for the term of his natural life. That replaced the death penalty. And so I was told, and that's normally about 35 years you serve in prison, and if you've been a good prisoner, you can apply to the president or the governor general or the governor of the state for release on license. I found out only last year when I was out of his imprisonment for life, he served 7 years and was released.
Wow.
So I'm taking it upon myself to look into this and to ask appropriate questions of authorities such as why was he released and who released him. And and normally you also have to, if he's still alive or she is still alive, normally the government has to speak to the judge who imposed the sentence. And I will say no one spoke to me. So I am going to look into this because a legal system is destroyed when people or countries say, yes, we will adhere to it, and then they don't.
Gotcha. All right. So going back to the ICC, David, it's been around now for a long period of time.
The ICC's been around for 22 years.
Sure.
The ICJ has been around since 1945.
And the ICJ has roots back to the trying of Nazis and Japanese?
Well, it does.
Yes.
It's why it was set up to deal with the Nuremberg war crimes trials and the Rabaul. And again, most people don't know that more Japanese were prosecuted, senior officers, government, were prosecuted in Rabaul, which is it's now a part of New Guinea, Papua New Guinea, in 1947 and executed, then were tried and imprisoned and executed at the Nuremberg trials. Again, it's always Europe tends to grab the spotlight. So, yes, that the ICJ came about as a result of what happened. There was, prior to the United Nations, if you will recall, there was a body from 1919 up to the outbreak of the Second World War called you had the United Nations and then you had the League of Nations. The League of Nations had a court in The Hague, and it wasn't called the International Criminal Court or whatever. I forgot. It had a name, and I'm afraid I can't recall it. But I don't think they ever sat on anything.
On anything at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a different time.
It was a different
world, I suppose.
Well, certainly. And when you look now, this is the reason why the ICC, the International Criminal Court, came into being in 2002, because there was a recognition, obviously, of the disgraceful and horrendous crimes against humanity, genocide, that had been happening in the Balkans in the 1990s.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and again, we've got a lot of countries signed up to this, a lot that don't. If these people that are in a country that aren't signed up to...
Can't be touched.
Unless they leave the country.
If they leave the country and go into a country that has signed up... Now, I think at the last count there was 196 sovereign states in the world, and 124 of those nations have signed up. Now, I see there's pressure building on Australia to withdraw. The Americans haven't signed up to the International Criminal Court. That's why they don't recognise its jurisdiction. And there's slight pressure starting, given this pro-Palestinian either vocal support of the left in this country or the deafening silence of them to let's pull ourselves out of this International Criminal Court, because it's a biased, this King's Counsel, I think his name is Khan or Mohammed Khan Karim, if you can find it for me, There's been claims that he just instigated this on his own. And also, George Clooney's wife, Amal Clooney, who, with you think, she is of Muslim origin. She is a supporter of Palestinian causes. That's fine. But she's supported the issuance of these arrest warrants.
Okay,
Yeah.
So conflicts of interest have been raised.
Well, I suppose we all have preferences. I
Yes.
tend to be a more conservative man than I am a progressive man. But as I've said on this show in the past, I've been voting since the 1972 elections, and I have voted for Labor more than in both federal and state than I voted for coalition. Yet I was born, grew up in, went to school. Sir Robert Menzies' seat, the most blue blood seat, Kooyong,
Yes.
in Melbourne. And it's represented by these unproductive and could never govern. All they can ever do is be spoilers, and spoilers with the other spoiler called the Greens, the Teals. And my hope is that the Australian electorate will finally say, because there's a lot of people predicting, and maybe we should do a show on this, a lot of predicting that the next election we will have a minority government, which means Labor will never get enough seats to rule in its own right. But with the Greens and the seats and the Teals, they'll be able to form a government. Now, if you have that, we become like Italy in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. We become a fractured government with different parties going into coalition, going out. And although people complain about the two-party system, there's a lot of benefits for it. But if we have a government made up of Mr. Albanese, Adam Bandt, and whoever's going to be the leader of the Teals, because they're all supposedly independents, but they all, 90% of the time, vote with Labor.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Look, the political situation across the world, in fact, even here in this country, is getting to a point where we're just sick of being treated like children. We're sick of being listening to someone not supporting good ideas.
But it is up to us not to let we should be going to the Greens and saying, get lost. You have these noble ideas that can never be put into place. You've got to deal with what the Germans developed under Bismarck, and Henry Kissinger used it brilliantly. It's called realpolitik. In other words, you can have all these ideas, but can they be implemented?
And that's a good point.
Yes.
All right, David, we've run out of time.
All right.
Thank you very much for your insights again this morning.
Well, I thank you. Goodbye, Somerset. Remember, if you want me to recognise you, just send me your name.
You've been listening to 4CRB's interviews and talkback series. Support local online content and become a financial supporter today at 4crb.com.